World War I, the war that changed the world. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the world you knew had suddenly changed. In 1914, Europe stood on the edge of a conflict that would become one of the deadliest wars in human history. This was World War I, also known as the Great War. The story began with rising tensions between powerful European countries. Two major alliances had formed. The Triple Entente included Britain, France, and Russia, while Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies stood on the opposing side. Competition over territory, military power, nationalism, and political influence had created an extremely dangerous situation. Then, on June 28, 1914, a shocking event changed everything. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war on July 28, 1914. What followed was a chain reaction. Russia supported Serbia and began mobilizing its forces. Germany supported Austria-Hungary and declared war on Russia. Germany then declared war on France. German troops entered neutral Belgium as part of their plan to attack France, and Britain entered the war after Belgium was invaded. Within weeks, Europe was at war. At first, many people believed the conflict would be short. But the reality was very different. On the Western Front, armies became trapped in a brutal system of trenches stretching across France and Belgium. Soldiers lived for weeks and months in muddy trenches, surrounded by difficult conditions and constant danger. Across the battlefield were machine guns, artillery, barbed wire, and other new weapons that made traditional military tactics extremely costly. One of the most famous battles was the Battle of the Somme in 1916. It became a symbol of the terrible human cost of the war. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded in a conflict where gaining even a small amount of territory could require enormous sacrifice. Technology changed warfare forever. Machine guns made defensive positions extremely powerful. Poison gas was introduced as a terrifying new weapon. Tanks appeared on the battlefield, while airplanes were increasingly used for reconnaissance and combat. Submarines also became an important part of naval warfare. But World War I was not only fought in Europe. The conflict spread across the Middle East, Africa, and the seas. Millions of soldiers from countries and territories around the world became involved. In 1917, another major change occurred. The United States entered the war after years of trying to remain neutral. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare and other events contributed to America's decision to join the Allies. That same year, Russia experienced revolution. The Russian Empire eventually withdrew from the war, allowing Germany to move more forces toward the Western Front. By 1918, Germany and its allies were exhausted. The Allies, strengthened by American troops and resources, launched major offensives. German forces were pushed back, and political unrest grew inside Germany. Finally, on November 11, 1918, an armistice came into effect. The fighting stopped, but the war had left Europe devastated. Millions of soldiers and civilians had died, and countless others had been wounded or displaced. Entire communities had been destroyed, economies had suffered, and several major empires had collapsed, including the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles officially established peace terms with Germany. The treaty placed significant restrictions and financial obligations on Germany. However, the peace that followed was fragile. World War I changed borders, governments, societies, and international politics. It also created conditions that would contribute to further conflict decades later. The Great War began with a single assassination, but its causes were much deeper. Alliances, nationalism, militarism, imperial competition, and political tensions had created a situation where one crisis could ignite a much larger conflict. World War I is remembered not only because of the battles, but because of the enormous changes it brought to the modern world. It was a war that began in Europe, but its consequences were felt across the entire globe. And that is why, more than a century later, the story of World War I remains one of the most important chapters in human history.